flashbacks.
No. No flashbacks. They are crass, lazy, and they interrupt the flow of the story. In my opinion, they are the last refuge of a moribund imagination.
Ah, flashbacks. They interrupt the present story in order to tell of a past event, and despite what this guy just said, they're an important tool at a writer's disposal. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at two wildly different films to see how each handles this narrative device, and to see what we can learn from both about how, and how not, to write a good flashback. First up, we have The Aeronauts, an adventure film about a pioneering balloon ride set in the 1800s that's allegedly based on true events. The story here is dead simple. A pilot and a scientist take off in a hot air balloon and eventually reach a record height of 23,000 feet. The pilot, Amelia, congratulates the scientist, James, on this accomplishment and says they may as well turn around, but James wants to keep going higher, so Amelia hesitantly does.
What have we to lose? Our lives!
But before long, James is suffering from hypoxia, a lack of oxygen, hypothermia from the cold, and from the effects of a recently acquired concussion, all of which cause him to act irrationally and to eventually pass out. Things only get worse when Amelia tries to open the air valve at the top of the balloon so they can finally descend, only to learn that the valve is frozen shut, and in the thinning air, the balloon is expanding and rising ever higher. So Amelia has to do some pretty heroic stuff in order to unstick the valve, and then James has to do some pretty clever engineering on the fly for them to land, and that's it. That's the movie. They go up, they come down. Again, the story is dead simple. It's too simple, really, to make an entire feature-length film out of, and that's where the flashbacks come in. I didn't time this, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Aeronaut spends as much time flashing back as it spends in the present tense. The story actually begins with a flashback. We see Amelia and this mystery guy in a rapidly descending balloon, and in the next shot, the guy is falling to his death. It's not until after Amelia and James begin their journey that we learn this was Amelia's husband, Pierre, whom James says he admired and wished he could have met. Now, all the flashbacks that follow mainly show what James and Amelia had to go through to get to this point. Like we see James giving a speech to the Royal Society of London saying he wants to commission a balloon flight for the purpose of one day predicting the weather, for which he is roundly mocked.
Gentlemen, please!
We then see James asking Amelia to be his pilot, and despite her initial skepticism, she eventually agrees.
Do you even have a balloon?
We then see Amelia's sister talking her out of joining James because of what happened to Pierre. This is followed by Amelia telling James she's decided not to be his pilot, which is followed by James trying to join up with someone else who tells him to get lost. Finally, James's friend John, with the help of a well-timed snowstorm, successfully convinces Amelia to reconsider. The final flashback occurs after Amelia tries to descend against James's wishes, prompting James, who isn't thinking clearly, to jump on top of her and say science is worth dying for, which is better than what killed her reckless, thrill-seeking husband. Amelia slaps him and says he doesn't know the real story, so we flash back to the day Pierre died and learn it was Amelia who insisted they keep climbing higher, which led to the balloon tearing, and after they jettisoned everything they could to lose weight, Pierre jumped in order to save Amelia. That may have seemed like a lot of flashbacks, but I actually skipped a few, and it still took me longer to summarize them than to summarize the main story, and as far as I'm concerned, the majority of these don't work. There are, however, two that got it right, so if you want to take a stab at which of these two is the best, go ahead and do so now. For my money, the answer is these two, the very first and the very last. The first foreshadows the dangers to come, shows us what Amelia is dealing with psychologically, and establishes an interesting mystery for us, the audience. Then the second, longer flashback, solves that mystery by giving us information that would have been difficult for us to figure out on our own, like how Pierre jumped in order to save Amelia, and how Amelia blames herself for what happened. This new information advances the plot by countering what James said about Pierre being reckless, and gives us a deeper understanding of our co-protagonist. That's good writing. However, all these other flashbacks, like I said before, don't work very well, and the reason for that is always the same. Consider the obstacles on display here. James wants to fund a hot air balloon voyage, but no one supports him. James wants Amelia to be his pilot, but she doesn't take him seriously. Amelia wants to start aeronauting again, but she can't get over the death of Pierre. These obstacles may sound different from each other, but they all pretty much ask the same question. Will James and Amelia get to go up in a hot air balloon together? The problem with that question is, we already know the answer. The movie literally starts with these two taking off in a hot air balloon. Worse, these obstacles are not very daunting. The way James ultimately gets his funding is, he gets his funding. The way James convinces Amelia to be his pilot is, he convinces Amelia to be his pilot. The way Amelia gets over the death of Pierre is, She gets over the death of Pierre. Not only are these flashbacks not necessary for us to make sense of the main story, they're also not interesting. The only useful thing about them that I can see is they provide aspiring writers like us with a teachable exercise. How can they be fixed? What I would do here is get rid of a couple and move the rest to the start of the story so they take place before James and Amelia take off. That way the only flashbacks in the story are the two that actually work. Now, as to whether that change alone would turn this into a good movie, probably not, but it does beg an interesting question. How would a better writer make use of this narrative tool? To answer that, let's take a closer look at a very different story than The Aeronauts. Whereas that was a purely standalone film, El Camino, written and directed by Vince Gilligan, centers around an established character from a show you're better off having already seen. I'm not going to recap the entire film here, but there is an excellent stretch I want to go over because the two flashbacks it contains are just about perfect. It goes like this. Jesse Pinkman, a seriously wanted fugitive, has just been freed from a horrifying situation and desperately needs cover, so he hits up his old friends Badger and Skinny Pete, who help him evade the police, then send him on his way in a different car. Despite needing to get as far from New Mexico as he can, Jesse first goes to this apartment, which is blocked off with police tape. Once inside, he proceeds to tear the place apart and eventually finds money hidden inside the freezer. But just as he does, these two police show up and this incredibly tense scene follows that culminates in what appears to be Jesse's arrest before he realizes these two aren't cops. Fearing he's about to be killed, he yells out, "I know where the money is!" Then while Casey here deals with a nosy neighbor, Jesse shows Neil the freezer. Guessing Neil won't shoot him with an eyewitness close by, he takes a third of the money for himself. Then as he goes to depart, something seems to jog his memory, prompting Neil to say,
"I was wondering when you were gonna remember me."
Jesse then takes his money to Ed the Disappearer in the hopes that Ed will help him escape to a new location and set him up with a new identity. Ed is willing to do that, but Jesse owes him $250,000, and even with his recently acquired cash, he winds up $1,800 short. Ed, a man of rock-solid principles, refuses to bend, which means Jesse needs money. With no other option, he visits the garage where Neil and Casey are entertaining some friends and says he needs $1,800. They refuse to give it to him, and that's all I'm gonna say. Now, if you haven't seen El Camino, then based on this quick recap, you're probably wondering at least 3 things. 1, whose apartment is this? 2, how did Jesse know there's money hidden somewhere inside? And 3, how did Jesse and Neil know each other? These questions aren't answered in the main story, nor are they questions that we the audience can figure out for ourselves, which means the only way to address them is through flashbacks. The first features the wonderfully disturbing character Todd, who is part of the gang holding Jesse hostage. After telling Jesse he needs his help with something, they drive to Todd's apartment where they find the body of his cleaning lady, whom Todd murdered after she inadvertently found his money. Todd tells Jesse he's thought of a better hiding place so this will never happen again, which answers our first 2 questions. The second flashback takes place after Neil makes it clear that he and Jesse have previously met, and in it we learn that Neil welded together the setup that the biker gang used to keep Jesse hostage, which answers our third question. These are both excellent flashbacks. The one with Todd in particular is a really absorbing short story that's worth watching all by itself. It's dark, funny, sad, and exciting. Still, even with those qualities, the most important function it serves is it answers these 2 questions. Likewise, the flashback with Neil is also interesting by itself. It shows what Jesse's life was like before he was freed, and beyond that, it makes his and Neil's conflict personal, which helps the story by making Neil a more formidable and compelling antagonist. But once again, despite those qualities, the most important function this flashback serves is it answers this question.
"I was wondering when you were gonna remember me."
One that we the audience would feel cheated if we didn't get an answer to. So whereas the failed flashbacks in The Aeronauts failed because they were unnecessary to the story and uninteresting on their own, these flashbacks in El Camino are both. I've said before that in the creative world there are no magic formulas that are guaranteed to always work. However, there are rules of thumb that you can usually count on. With that in mind, here's my unsolicited advice to any would-be authors or filmmakers when it comes to flashbacks. First, remember they're just a tool. Before using one in a story, ask yourself if it's the right tool for the job. If the event you're flashing back to could simply take place at the start of your story, or worse, isn't even necessary to it, you're probably using the wrong tool. Second, ask yourself what kind of information the flashback is providing. Just because it's new doesn't mean it'll be compelling, especially if all it does is pose questions we the audience already know the answer to. However, if the flashback provides vital information that we need in order to make sense of the story, or provides useful information that enhances the characters, then your odds of success are much greater.
Easy.
flashbacks.
No.
No what?
No flashbacks. They are crass.